Hello, everybody. Welcome to the paper and the data. This is module 4 for peer review. These modules were originally presented at the Ocean Science meeting in February of 2020. And I want to give credit, although Erin Robinson is not on this particular recording, she did provide significant contribution to these slides. She's the executive director for Earth Science Information Partners. And today we have with us Randy Towson, the AGU's Director for Publications and Operations. Hello, Randy, how are you?
Hi, Shelley, I'm well. How are you today?
I am really, really good. Randy, I think you're going to be our primary speaker today, so let me get you to your first slide rather quickly. So within the module set, we're here at peer review. Randy's going to talk primarily about what's happening at AGU, but many of these things apply to any journal. I think this is good for just about anybody and anywhere you want to actually publish. And Randy, I just love this image. I hope you find it humorous. Here you go.
So at AGU, hi everybody first. At AGU, we've been doing a lot of engagement with our editors and with our authors, but we've kind of missed out on the missing link, which is the peer reviewers, letting them know what the expectations are for some of these guidelines that we have in place. So we will be updating a lot of our resources, and we're putting together a lot of ways to engage reviewers so that they are aware of what it is we're looking for and what it is they should be checking for in our submissions. The important thing is that for any submission, we ask that the reviewers pay attention to the data sections and the open research section. And particularly now we're talking about putting the data and software availability statements in this particular section. It's really critical that peer reviewers pay a lot of attention to this section and verify that everything there is valid. They go through and they validate all the links. They make sure that the statement holds true to what it is that we're looking for, that access is clearly explained. We want to make sure that the data, if it is in a supporting information file or supplemental file, for the purposes of peer review, we want to also confirm that the data is also in software are also put into repositories. So through the different stages of the paper, the initial submission and subsequent revisions, that could be an evolution of the process. They could just have that supporting document up until the paper is about to reach the final decision. We don't want the editor to make a decision of acceptance until that data is available in a repository. You really want to make sure that the reviewers have an opportunity to vet that data. We want to make sure that all the citations are present, all the relevant citations are present in the reference list, and that all the links are working accurately. Next slide, please, Shelley. Did you want to say anything on this part, Shelley?
Yeah, actually, Randy, thanks for catching that. There's one kind of weird thing that a sequence of events within the workflow of getting the paper ready and getting the data ready. It is actually possible that the data is not published yet, but it is poised to be published by your repository. So that DOI link might actually not appear to be working. And what happens is the repository provides the peer reviewer with a share link, something that's temporary. And it's important to know that even if that share link is working and the DOI is not, that is a very temporary situation. And the share link won't last very long. It will actually no longer work after the data is published. So the way you'll know the difference is the persistent identifier will have the DOI in it, and then the share link will look like a regular old URL without any particular formatting. So just kind of a highlight, sort of like a higher level thing to check on, and something that can get a little confusing when we're going through the process.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
And Shelley, just to touch on that point too, I think the evolution could really be explained for the initial submission. If the data and the software are not in a repository at the time of submission, that availability section may say although the paper isn't curated although the data isn't in a repository yet, this is my plan during the peer review process to curate that data, to deposit the data in the software in a repository. And that statement may evolve from the initial submission version to the final version because the data would have been curated and the access is explained at that time.
You know what, Randy, that is so important. Let me say that back to you because I think that really confuses a lot of our authors. And I think they get a little apprehensive because these new policies they may not have been aware of. So let me say it again. So in the open research section, you as an author have submitted your paper and you may have just started the curation process for your data or your software. And so what you can say in that section is like a temporary phrase or temporary guidance to the peer reviewer and the editor saying, I've placed my data here in this repository. It's currently being curated. We'll have a persistent identifier at the time of acceptance. And meanwhile, I've placed the data in this supplement, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem about right?
Yeah, that's absolutely
Okay.
right. We don't want to create any barriers for authors to submit. So as long as they're explaining that if they did not get a chance to do this prior to, let's say they saw the author guidelines right at the time they had just begun their submission, we don't want them to stop, pause to do that. We want them to continue on with their plan in place, clearly explained, so that the peer review can continue on.
Wonderful. I think that's really important. Okay, I'm going to move you on to the next slide. There we go.
Sure. So we ask peer reviewers to look at a number of things when they're taking a look and assessing the submissions and validating the results. So these are a lot of standard questions. Is the paper written in a clear, concise manner? Is the paper appropriate for this journal? Is it in scope within the journal that it's submitted to? Are the interpretations and conclusions supported by the evidence presented? But then once again, very specifically to the point of this particular webinar, was the data or software available for review? If not, it makes it, it makes it a little bit more difficult to validate those conclusions. So, that might be a note that the reviewers give back to the editor to say, everything seemed okay, but I couldn't access the data. That's a very, very important note. And the editor could make a determination depending on what restrictions may be in place versus what should or could be made available on which way the paper should go. Should it be sent back to the author for further revisions, or is the unavailability to access the data or software a deal breaker, at which point you would turn the paper away from review for the journal.
Randy, if I could add a little bit there, this set of criteria is not just AGUs. This is pretty common across all of the Earth and Space Science journals because of the work happening with open data and open software. So if you're really challenged with making your data or software available, you're likely going to be challenged with any journal you seek publication in. So we do encourage folks to kind of figure out how to comply as closely as possible.
And that's absolutely correct, Shelley. And what we've seen as well is that authors who may not want to comply with our policy because they think this too rigid, take their paper and submit it to another journal that asks the same peer reviewer to review the paper, and they say, look, you haven't made any changes. I've seen this before, and you haven't done anything to make the data available. So you're right. You're not really going to get away from this. Most journals are practicing the same activities in this area. So it's a consistent behavior. We really recommend that this data is made available and the software is made available and explained in the matter so that the reviewers can have an opportunity to vet it and test it out to the extent that they can.
If an author has a question on, I'm thinking forward on our slides and I'm not sure that we've actually provided this information, but if an author is trying to understand our process, what would you recommend at least for AGU journals, for them to do to get their questions answered?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So there's a couple of things they can do. They can contact the editor-in-chief, who's been well versed in these discussions. They can contact the journal inbox to the journal they're submitting to, and then they can either answer the questions immediately, or they can forward it to the appropriate individuals. Usually that's me or you, Shelley, for AGU, to get more clarity and guidance on those types of scenarios.
Great. Thanks, Randy.
Sure.
So number 4 is another one to highlight. So on module 2, where we talked about data, we indicated that anything that you're using from someone else, anything that you've created new, and number 4 indicates any of your processed or aggregated or synthesized data that supports graphics, or some sort of a graphical description within your paper. What's important here is that you don't want someone looking at that visualization guessing what those data points are. You really want to provide them, and that's one of the questions that's being asked here in number 4 is, is there data that supports all of the graphics?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, let's go on to the next one. I think I just turned off my video. Not fun. So one of the reasons that we're doing this is, as an author yourself, when you're looking at somebody else's paper, what you are really interested in is the submission that you're looking at, does it explain where the data and software are located accurately? So ask this of yourself. Do I, in my submission, have I explained really carefully where my data and software are located? Have I provided persistent identifiers? These are commonly a digital object identifier, but they may be something else, and that's perfectly okay. And I don't want to be the only person who has access to this. You need to provide access through a third party, like a repository, such that you that someone else is not reliant on you providing that data or software. In module 1, we gave an example from Peter Brewer, who was trying to gain access to data points from some of his peers, and none of them were helpful. And you don't want to be that person. You want to be very helpful, and such that the data is as available as possible. And if there is a fee, for whatever reason, because the data comes from somewhere that happens to charge a fee, that you indicate that. And whatever the accessibility requirements are, they're clearly stated. And then you need to describe your data or software as best you can, following your community standards. And that's usually described as metadata. And you can lean on your community to provide you with that information. And across AGU's domains, we're working to make that information even more clear, and communities to help with that. And then the usage license for the data or software as open as it can be. And that's important because science builds upon science. And if you've created some really important data, we want you to get credit for that. So it needs to be have a recommended citation and a license that allows for people to access and reuse and give you credit as well, and similarly for software. There you go, Randy.
Yeah, so just to really recap on what we touched on previously, it's really important for the peer reviewers to be able to validate what is being expressed in the manuscript. So they need access. They need to be able to access the data and the software using the research. So authors should provide as much information as possible about what that access looks like. Like Shelley just mentioned, if there are barriers to the access, whether it's a fee, whether there's a registration involved, or whether you need some other permissions in order to access the data, as long as that's expressly explained in the open research section of the manuscript, it helps the peer reviewers understand what that need is, and they can go as far as they possibly can to access the data, so they can validate the data that supports the science and the visualizations, the images, the figures, the tables, and then confirm that the data or the software citation actually is present in the reference list, that the links work out, the persistent lists, the persistent citations and links as well, not just what they've used to validate throughout the peer review, but right before publication, hopefully those links have been resolved into something more persistent.
Exactly. Wonderful. Great, thank you. So everybody, that concludes this module on peer review. And if you have any questions, you see our emails there. And thank you very much.
Thank you.